Imagine you're at a huge global business conference. Everyone's trying to talk about their company's performance, but they're all speaking different languages. It's chaos, right? Well, that's kind of what the world of accounting can be like without a common standard. Today, we're going to decode IFRS 1. This is the essential rulebook for any company taking that massive leap to international financial reporting standards. It's basically the official guide to learning and adopting a whole new financial language.
So, how exactly do you make a switch like that without everything getting lost in translation? That is the exact question IFRS 1 is designed to answer. You can think of it as the official translation dictionary and grammar guide, all rolled into one. Its whole purpose is to make sure a company's first words in this new global language are clear, correct, and instantly understood by investors no matter where they are in the world.
All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll talk about why we even need a universal standard in the first place. Then we'll get into the real nuts and bolts of the IFRS 1 guidebook itself. We're going to see how companies create their official starting line, or day one. Then we'll unpack the big main rule of the game, explore the super important exceptions that make it all workable, and finally, look at how companies have to explain the entire switch to the rest of us.
Okay, so let's start with the core problem. Picture this. You're an investor sitting in, say, Tokyo, and you want to compare a German car company to a Brazilian tech firm. If they're both using different accounting rules, their financial statements are, well, they're practically useless for comparison. You'd be totally lost. It's like trying to compare apples and oranges on a global scale. It's frustrating, confusing, and frankly, impossible. This lack of a common language hides risks, and it definitely hides opportunities.
And this is exactly the problem that International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS, were created to fix. The entire goal of IFRS is to be that single universal language for business. The whole point is to create one common platform so a company's financial story is understandable and, this is the key, comparable, no matter where in the world they operate.
So, if the whole collection of IFRS standards is the language, then you should think of IFRS 1 as the Rosetta Stone. It's not going to teach you every single word in the language. That's what all the other individual standards are for. But what IFRS 1 does is give you the master key, the framework to unlock the entire system. It's the guide for translating your old accounting language, your previous GAAP, into this new one. So who actually needs this Rosetta Stone? Well, any first-time adopter. But here's a really crucial detail you need to catch. This isn't just for companies that have never, ever touched an IFRS rule. The definition applies to any company that is making its first explicit and unreserved statement of compliance. So even if your company has been dabbling in IFRS for a while, the minute you stand up and officially declare, "We are fully compliant," bam, you are now a first-time adopter, and IFRS 1 becomes your mandatory guide.
And this standard isn't just about throwing a bunch of rules at companies. It has a really clear mission. The goal is to make sure a company's very first IFRS financial statements are top quality, totally transparent, and genuinely comparable. But check out that last point. This is so important. It also aims to be practical. It acknowledges that this whole process is a huge undertaking, and it has to be doable at a cost that doesn't completely outweigh the benefits. It's a really smart blend of being principled and pragmatic. Now we're getting to the absolute heart of the process, creating what's called your day one. This is your opening IFRS statement of financial position. Think of it as a clean slate, the solid foundation that every single one of your future IFRS reports will be built on. If you get this wrong, the whole house of cards could come tumbling down later. It's that important. This timeline makes it all a lot more real. Let's follow Entity A. Let's say they want to issue their first official IFRS statements for the year that ends on December 31st, 20x5. Well, IFRS requires you to show at least 1 year of comparable data. That means they also have to present their 20x4 numbers under IFRS. So that pushes their official date of transition, their day one, all the way back to January 1st, 20x4. That's the exact date for which they have to prepare that all-important opening balance sheet. So how do they build that opening statement? IFRS 1 lays out 4 fundamental steps. The best way to think about it is like a huge financial spring cleaning. First, you have to add anything and everything that IFRS says should be on your books. Second, you have to throw out anything your old rules allowed, but IFRS says, nope, that doesn't belong. Third, you relabel and reorganize everything into the proper IFRS categories. And finally, you remeasure all of it using the new IFRS valuation rules. Okay, so you've done this massive spring clean. What happens to all the financial pluses and minuses that result from it? They don't go through the income statement for the current year. Nope. Instead, every single adjustment is bundled together into one big, one-time hit that goes directly into retained earnings or maybe another part of equity. It's a clean, direct reset of the company's net worth under the new set of rules right on day one.
So what's the big overarching idea that drives this whole process? It's a really powerful principle called retrospective application. And in simple terms, what it means is that a company has to prepare its opening IFRS statement as if it had always been using IFRS from the very beginning. It's all about applying the newest, most current standards backwards in time to create a consistent history starting from that day one. And this quote, pulled directly from the standard itself, makes it absolutely crystal clear. The accounting policies you use on day one have to be the exact same ones you use all the way through your first set of IFRS financial statements. It's this unwavering consistency that really creates the foundation for genuine comparability. Now, as you can probably imagine, trying to apply every single rule backwards in time could be an absolute nightmare, right? You might need data that your company never even collected, or it could force you to make judgments about the past with the totally unfair advantage of hindsight. The people who write these standards, they knew this, and that's exactly why IFRS 1 has these practical safety valves built right in the form of exceptions. And these safety valves come in two main flavors. On one side, you have mandatory exceptions. There's no choice here. You must follow these. They basically forbid you from going back in time on certain things, usually because it would be impossible or require you to be a mind reader. Then, on the other side, you have voluntary exemptions. These are optional bits of relief that you can choose to use to make the transition simpler and cheaper. So what do these actually look like? Well, for the mandatory ones, you generally can't go back and undo a past decision to sell off a financial asset. The same goes for some really complex hedge accounting transactions from the past. And this is a big one. IFRS 1 stops you from using what you know now to go back and change past estimates. You have to stick with the information you had back then. No hindsight allowed. Now, on the voluntary side, companies get some incredibly powerful options. For example, they can choose not to restate past business acquisitions using the latest IFRS rules, which can be a huge time saver. They can use simplified accounting for some leases, but one of the most popular, most useful exemptions is a real game changer for a lot of companies, and it's something called deemed cost. So, what on earth is deemed cost? Honestly, it's a beautifully practical shortcut. Instead of having to dig through decades of dusty old records to find the original price of a factory built in the 1970s, a company can just choose to use its fair market value on the date of transition as its new or deemed cost. From that day forward, that's the new starting number. For companies with a lot of old property and equipment, this is a massive relief. Okay, so you've done all the hard work. You've made the switch, you've applied the rules and the exceptions, and you have a shiny new set of IFRS-compliant numbers. But you can't just drop them on investors and walk away. The final, absolutely non-negotiable step is transparency. IFRS 1 requires companies to show their work and explain exactly how and why their numbers changed when they went from the old language to the new one. And this explanation has to be really comprehensive. The company has to spell out in detail how the transition impacted its balance sheet, its income statement, and its cash flows. You can think of it like building a bridge. You're building a bridge from the old familiar numbers to the new ones so that investors and analysts can walk across it and see exactly what changed and, more importantly, why. And this is basically what that bridge looks like in practice. Companies provide these detailed reconciliations. This one shows how equity changed. You start with the number under the old rules, $1 million. Then you clearly list out each major adjustment you made during the transition, like adding $50,000 for capitalizing leases for the first time. You follow all the steps and you arrive at the new final equity figure under IFRS. There are no black boxes, everything is out in the open. And just to be clear, this isn't just a one-off thing for the balance sheet. This detailed reconciliation process is required for the company's equity at 2 points in time, the date of transition and the end of the comparative year. And it also has to be done for its total comprehensive income for that comparative year. It's all about showing the complete impact on both the company's financial position and its performance. So let's boil all of this down. What are the big takeaways? First, IFRS 1 is that essential one-time use guidebook for switching to the global language of IFRS. Its entire goal is to create a high-quality, transparent, and truly comparable starting point. The main principle is this idea of applying everything backwards, but that's balanced with a set of really smart, practical exceptions. And finally, you have to show all your work. Full reconciliation and disclosure are absolutely non-negotiable.
So, IFRS 1 gives companies an incredibly detailed and practical roadmap for what is a really complex journey. But this leaves us with a much bigger, more fundamental question, doesn't it? Does successfully navigating this transition, does adopting this single global language of accounting always lead to a more valuable destination? Does it truly deliver better, more useful information for the investors and the stakeholders that this whole system was designed to serve in the first place?